Chapter 12 covers the world of soup, soup, oh glorious soup. So, neat thing about soup is that you can make amazing soups from the most expensive ingredients in the world, or you can make amazing soups from leftovers. And that's one of the things I think is really cool about soup making is that you have that option. In fact, a lot of culinarians, one of their first creative challenges, a lot of times from their chef, is to come up with soup of the day or soup of the week for them to use at the restaurant. My advice to you, don't go looking for the expensive stuff. Look for the leftovers. Look for the stuff that is the trimmings that would be thrown away, ways that you can make these amazing flavors come together, but do it, I don't want to say on the cheap, but do it with being frugal in mind and the fact that you're helping to get more bang for the buck when it comes to the ingredients that you're using. So when you get your first opportunity to do soups of the day or soup of the week, be mindful of that and making sure that you're using the stuff to the best of your ability and trying to save the company as much money as you can while still making an amazing product. Of course, soups are universally recognized as comfort food when we are needing, a little something to make us feel a little bit better and stuff. That's usually where we end up going is to soup along those lines. When we look at soup, we look at a few different categories. The first two are really the main ones, our clear soups and our thick soups. From those, we have a few subcategories. And then we have bisques, chowders, and cold soups all going around there as well. So we'll start off with the clear soups. Clear soups, we look at broths and we look at consommes. So the difference between the two, a broth, and people use this term interchangeably with stock, but there's technically a difference. Technically, a broth is a byproduct of cooking meat in liquid. So you're going to take a whole chicken and you're going to cook that chicken with water and mirepoix and seasonings and such. And then you're going to pull that chicken out and then you're going to pick the meat off the chicken to use for a soup or a chicken dumplings or something along those lines. The liquid that's left over is technically the broth. Okay? So again, think of it compared to stock, where we're using the bone specifically for pulling the flavor to make a flavored liquid. Where the broth, you're cooking meat, and it's a byproduct of cooking that meat. So broth-based soups are soups that we use broth as a base, and then we use the rest of the ingredients as garnishes. So chicken noodle soup is a broth-based soup. The chicken's broth is the soup. The noodles and the carrots and whatever else you're putting in, those are the garnishes that go into that broth-based soup. And again, chicken noodles, vegetable soup, beef and veggie, beef and rice, any of those, types of soups are all fair game, and those are all broth-based soups. A consomme is what we call a clarified soup. So this is, we actually use stock as a base, and then we make it clearer and add more flavor to it. So it's a high-end broth style soup, but made with stock instead of broth as the base. So the way a consomme works is you start with a cold stock, remove the fat and everything from it. Then you add what's called a clear meat. You can really enunciate that one, right? Clear meat. So clear meat is typically a mixture of a ground meat, usually that coincides with the broth, with the stock. So if you've got chicken stock, it's usually like ground chicken, beef stock, ground beef, et cetera, et cetera. Egg whites, mirepoix, usually in real small chop or dice. Sachet ingredients that are not in a cheesecloth like you normally would, and usually some sort of acid like lemon juice, white wine, or something along those lines. So that mixture goes into the stock. You bring it to a simmer. what's going to happen is all that product that's coming in is going to start coagulating. The proteins are going to start coagulating, and it's going to form what's called a raft. And so once it starts setting up all together, what happens is this raft slowly starts working its way up to the top of the liquid. While it's working its way up, it's acting as a vacuum, and it's pulling any of the impurities. So the egg whites and the meat in there are capturing those impurities that are in that liquid to begin with. Once it comes up to the top, you create a hole in the raft so it doesn't allow steam to build up and then break the raft apart. It allows the liquid to bubble through. And then you let it simmer for an hour or so. What that does is it's extracting flavor from the mirepoix and the other ingredients in there. And it's also allowing it to even do some more clarification to strain out some more of those impurities. Once it's done simmering, then what you do is you strain it through several layers of cheesecloth to make sure you're getting rid of any of the any of the raft product and stuff that's in there. And then what's left should be almost crystal clear. It should look like colored water, like clear water, but colored of whatever the color of that stock is. And that is a consommé. Now, from there, then you would take that warm consommé, and then there are a bunch of traditional garnishes you can use. Le Guide Culinaire from Escoffier has a bunch of classic garnishes, you know, things such as paysan of vegetables, or raviolis, or even cooked egg, like taking some scrambled eggs, cooking it in a pan, and then putting it onto a cutting board and then slicing it into like ribbons to put into there. There's a bunch of different styles and stuff. The problem is, at least here in Peoria, is you can take the time, the couple hours it's going to take to make the consommé, but in most cases they're going to be like, oh, this is a good, you know, chicken noodle soup, or this is a good vegetable soup. They don't know necessarily the time that goes into it. Or even if you did talk to them about the consommé and stuff, it's not necessarily going to go, oh, okay, that makes more sense. In my opinion, unless you're doing something for competition, or it's things that you're doing a really fancy like French style night or something where it would maybe be more appreciated, to spend the time to do a full consommé is going to be a lot of work for not a lot of reward in it. But again, this is back to classic French and things that you do need to be aware of. You do need to know how a consommé is made, because that is part of that foundation that you're building. So thick soups, the other category that has subcategories, are divided into two: cream soups and pureed soups. So a cream soup is typically thickened with a roux, and then you have the ingredient or multiple ingredients that go into it that get pureed and strained. Pureed soups rely on the main ingredient to actually thicken it. And so it's usually starchier items that when you puree it, it will thicken up naturally on their own. So a cream soup, the best way I have always described it, my chef when I was in school described it, was cream of X soup. And X is like the algebra X. So you can put in whatever you want. So it could be cream of broccoli soup, cream of tomato soup, cream of chicken, cream of celery, whatever you want to call it. And in essence, what you do is you just substitute whatever that main ingredient is, the X, for in your recipe, and you can get that flavor soup going on. In classic times, a cream soup was typically a velouté or a bechamel that they added the extra ingredient to that they wanted to make the flavor of, cook it down, puree it, and then strain it so it was nice and smooth. And you would then end up with this finished product that they would have a cream of soup. Nowadays, we just don't have it floating around just, you know, willy-nilly. So we end up using, making the velouté or making the bechamel as part of the process when they're making this cream soup. But one thing you need to note is that a cream soup done right should be a velvety, smooth texture. Any chunks or things like that is garnish that's going in after the cream soup is done. So you should have a velvety, smooth texture with the cream soup. The pureed soup, on the other hand, again, you're doing a split pea soup, or you're doing a ham and bean soup, or something that you're going to puree up the product, and the pureed product acts as a natural thickener, and then it's not strained. So pureed soups are a little more on the rustic side or the country style side, where the cream soups have more of a refined style to it. Right? So those are the difference between the cream soups and the pureed soups when it comes to thick. Now, of course, when you're working with cream soups and stuff, especially with dairy, be careful about adding cold milk or cream to a hot soup, because if you add that cold liquid to that hot soup, you could curdle the cream or the milk. So what you want to do is do a tempering, where you add a little bit of the hot soup to the milk or cream to warm it up a little bit, and then pour it into the soup that you're working with. Another thing that sometimes chefs will do, especially if you know when things are going out, is you add the milk or cream to the soup just before service. Again, so you're not risking it being held and it getting too hot. Of course, once you add the milk or cream, never boil it, because we don't want to risk the fact of some curdling happening in the soup. And the other time sometimes you'll see finishing a cream soup with a bechamel or a cream sauce is another cool alternative, because the addition of the starch in there from the roux helps to stabilize it, to minimize the chance of curdling happening. So the other soups then, bisques. A true bisque, by its definition, is made from crustaceans. So shrimp bisque, lobster bisque, crawfish bisque, crab bisque, those are traditional bisques. Anything else that's outside of a seafood, a crustacean, that says bisque is technically not a bisque. They're using it for marketing purposes. Now, again, if you go and you call something a mushroom bisque, are the menu police going to come and arrest you? Of course not. But, from a traditional standpoint, it's technically not a bisque, but we use it for marketing because it sounds more expensive. If I say, tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we are featuring our tomato soup, our cream of tomato soup, okay, that's fine. But if I say, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are featuring our tomato bisque, again, it sounds fancier. I'm going to work under the assumption you're using fresh, locally, sourced tomatoes in this and stuff like that, not just pouring it out from, can of Chef Boyardee or whatever, or Campbell's to go along with it. But from the classic standpoint, a bisque is crustacean-based. Chowders are soups where chunks of the main ingredient and the garnishes are left in. They're not pureed together. Of course, the most famous being New England clam chowder. Other base chowders like potato chowders and corn chowders and stuff along those lines are all fair game. Of course, with the chowders, knife skills are really important because you're not pureeing the ingredients up. So you want to make sure they are all the same size when you're doing those. Majority of your chowders are going to be dairy based. There is one, though, in particular that's a chowder that's actually not dairy based. It's actually a Manhattan clam chowder, and that is actually a tomato based. But for the most part, your chowders that most of us know and love are usually a dairy based as far as the type of chowder. Last but not least is cold soups. Cold soups, some of them you cook and chill to serve, and some of them are prepared cold from the start. We don't go to cold soups in this class, but you will do it when you get into garde manger. You'll have a day where you just do cold soups and some cold sauces as well. So just note for this one, that is one of the categories. Some of them are cooked and then chilled. Others are just prepared cold from start to finish. So our soup is made. We've got to make some garnishes, some basic how-tos for garnish. First, make sure it looks nice. They should be attractive looking. It should not take away from the overall look of the soup. It should add to it. Meats and vegetables should be neatly cut into appropriate and uniform shapes and sizes. Again, visual, not only for visual, but also to make sure they all cook at the same time. The texture and flavor should be complementary to the soup. Starches and vegetables used as garnishes should be cooked separately because you have to remember you typically cook at different times. So you don't want to cook them all together and then have the starch overcooked while the vegetables are perfectly cooked or vice versa. It's better to cook the garnishes separately and then add them in. Make sure you're cooking your soups. Make sure you're cooking your garnishes until they're just done. They should not be falling apart. That's a big one that we see from time to time is people overcook them. You do a chicken noodle soup. You want the chicken to be tender, but not, just look at it and it falls apart on you because then that's overcooked. So be conscientious about how much you're cooking them and making sure you're getting them to the done stage, not overdone. Remember also that when they're being held and with the heat, that also continues the cooking process. So be conscientious about that as far as how done you get your garnishes so they're not overcooked by the time they've been sitting in the soup warmer for a couple hours. Soup service, to me, it's kind of a no-brainer, but serve cold soups cold and serve hot soups hot. Of course, 41 or below is for cold soups. It's funny, I leave this in because I think it's hilarious. Serving hot soups hot at 210 degrees is ideal. It doesn't make any sense because you're not going to hold it at 210. That thing is almost a rolling boil and you're not going to have any product left. Just make sure that it's served hot enough that when it gets out to the customer, they feel it's a hot soup. I mean, we don't want to burn their tongue hot, but we also don't want them to be out there and going, it's lukewarm. So even up in the 150, 160 range is okay. Just make sure that you're getting those out. And then also make sure what you're putting them into is around this, not same temperature, but, don't put cold soup in a bowl that you just pulled out of the dishwasher. On the flip side, for your hot soup, make sure your bowls for your hot soup are in a warmer, so it's not 60 degrees on that bowl, because then that's going to pull the heat out from the bowl of soup that you had. So be conscientious about those items as well. And that is our soup chapter, ladies and gentlemen. Looking forward to making soup with you all pretty soon. Thanks for watching, and see you for the next chapter.